Okay, so what I usually do is give you a rundown of what we're going to be doing in the front so you kind of know what you're looking out for. The number of learning objectives is pretty closely related to the number of types of problems you'll be working on, so you can expect 2 types of problems a day. Number one, what has to do with adding, subtracting combinations of positive, negative numbers that reach a sum of 0, and then the backside of your homework will be the finding the reciprocal of a number multiplied by the reciprocal to get the original. So you're looking for 2 types of problems. So as you're doing this, you're thinking, okay, I know how to do one problem. Okay, there's still more coming up there, so be taking notes, paying attention. First, some vocab. Sum, we know that means add. Product, we know that means multiply. Reciprocal, okay, that's mostly closely related with probably when you divide fractions, you use that word a lot. So you found the reciprocal of the second number and you multiply by. So right here is called reciprocal. You exchange the top and bottom no matter what. That's reciprocal. So if I did happy face over rock, the reciprocal would be rock over happy face, right? So it doesn't matter what the numbers are, it's just the fact that you switch them. Why is it important? That's what we want to know as well. Okay. So, let's see. What we're doing is we're leading up to this. Later this week. Solving a 2-step equation. Probably seen this before. So if you've seen this before, what would be the first step to do here? No? Yeah. Subtract 2. Yes. Subtract 2 on both sides. This subtracting 2 on both sides and getting 0, that's what this learning objective is all about. It's called the additive inverse. Another word for that is opposite. Okay? And it basically says, what do you need to do to get 0? So we picked -2 or -2 because this made it 0. Okay. And then we get to here. All right, we do both sides. And then we need to get rid of the 2. Well, that's what this other thing is. That's what the second objective is. Right? It gets you to 1 because our answer is going to be x equals something, right? That's 1x. We don't write the 1. We just put x equals. But we have to figure out how do you get from 2 to 1. What do you do to both sides? And I know many of you will say divide by 2. We're going to look at it slightly different because we're going to have a lot of fractions. Instead of dividing by 2, we're going to take the multiply by the reciprocal on both sides. So the reciprocal of 2 is 1 over 2. And you multiply both sides by 1 over 2. 5 times a half is just 5 halves, 5 over 2. And you have your final answer. So we're not doing the full equations yet, but that's why we're doing this. So just practicing, if you see a 2, you know to multiply by its reciprocal 1 over 2 because that equals 1. If you have a plus 2, adding, subtracting, you know to subtract 2 because that equals 0. Adding, subtracting, you get to 0. When you're multiplying, you want to get to 1. And that will get us to solve some equations. Yes, you should probably write some of it down. Okay. Now, taking notes does not mean copying. Okay. It can mean that, but if all you do is write down what you see, you have not taken notes. Taking notes is more important for you to write down things to yourself, aka notes, messages to yourself to help you remember things. Okay. The most important things you write down are stuff that I do not write down. They're notes to yourself to help you remind you about certain little details. Okay, on these types of problems, don't forget to do this. Because maybe when I gave you an example, you messed up on it. So you write a note to yourself so when you're doing your homework not to do that. My hope is, of course, you have your notes that are written neatly. And then when you're doing your homework, you have your notes out in front of you as you're doing it. So if you get stuck, you can look at your directions. You're trying to make a list of instructions. Sometimes, other times, you just need a list of problems and you learn by example. Sometimes just having a bunch of examples, you can figure out what you're supposed to do without writing it out in words. Just depends on the type of math we're doing. So yes, please write down more than what you see. Write down notes to yourself so you don't forget certain things. Maybe it's something you need to write down but nobody else does. who knows? It's important that you definitely do write it down. Okay, I had all these examples, but I just want to go straight to this. And because you probably don't need a whole lot of help to understand this, but it's technical enough that we spend a whole day on it. So looking at this, maybe start writing a few of these down. Write down the first ones, leave the space. You're just trying to get to 0. That's all. So what these are is that if this number that's missing right here, okay, no matter what it is, if I put some number here, would you know how to subtract it or add it so that it cancels out to 0? That's what we're doing all here. So if we had like a +7, what would you do to both sides? You had -7. 7 minus 7 is 0. That's all. Go ahead and do the rest of them. Both columns. Go ahead and do the rest of them. After a few, check with somebody. After a few, check with somebody. If you don't like that there's 2 signs here, check right after with somebody. What would you get? Here's what I got. Same thing here. If the double negative, you're not sure. You're going to do a lot of checking with each other. It doesn't have to always be the person next to you. You can try in front of you, behind you. Okay. But definitely check as you go. Don't just do them all, sit and wait, and realize, oh, I did everything incorrect. Check as you go so you don't repeat your mistakes, if any. Okay, so the next one down, just go ahead and say what you got. Right here. 9. -9 plus 9 is 0. And if you needed to, you can always make that number line, negatives down here, positive down here, a positive up here. So if you're at -9, yeah, you have to go up 9 to get to 0. What about here? Next one?
5.
And next? 3. Yep. Next? Next is -8, right? So if you missed that, here's where you start learning. You circle this and you write a note to yourself. You write, okay, 2 negatives make a positive when they're right next to each other. Right? If you didn't miss it, you don't need to write anything because you already knew it. So people write different things depending on your situations. So if you needed to, you could rewrite this as parenthesis +8 equals 0, and then it's clear to see, oh, the answer is -8. So my hope is if you messed up on here, you now have written a note to yourself, you're aware of what the mistake was, and when you do it on the homework, you're not making that mistake. If you just kind of look at it and you say, oh, okay, I got it wrong, when you start doing your homework, you keep making the same mistake until you actively do something to correct it. Okay, next part is, next one down would be -0.05. Good. Up here, 23.2 positive right here. Yeah, 15.01, 15 and 100th, right? Minus 15 100th is 0. If you need to here, okay, that's -1.3. That's what plus and minus means. It's just negative. So it would be, yeah, 1.3 minus 1.3 equals 0. And we have the same thing here. You can see these are kind of similar. So if you miss this problem right here, check your answer right here. Would you change it now that you see this? Would you change anything? Because, yeah, that means it's 2 negatives. Take away a negative, take away anything bad, that's a good thing. It's a positive. Therefore, we need a negative. $43 thousandths. And all this has to do with, well, if you have this number, how do you get rid of it? All right, that's the first part. So far, so good. When adding and subtracting, you need to get 0. Okay. Now, when you're multiplying and dividing, you need to get 1. Because your answer is not 0x, your answer is 1x. Right? So, looking at this, go ahead and jot those down before I start talking about it. That way you're not... Usually you can't do 2 things really well at the same time. You can do two things. You're doing half your brain's on one, half your brain's on the other. So I try not to talk while you're writing it down because you're not really listening, you're just writing things down. Give yourself a little space. Some of those are going to be bigger answers than the parentheses give you room for. All right. So we need to find the missing number that multiplies. We're not dividing, we're just multiplying. Although dividing and multiplying are very close related. So for instance, if you have a number 2, what can you multiply to get to 1? Right? And if it helps, if you have a whole number, you can make it over 1 if that helps you. So if you have a whole number, 2 over 1, what can you multiply to get to positive 1? It's reciprocal, right? So that's where we talked about earlier. Yeah, 1/2 times 2, half of 2 is 1. Makes sense. What about 3/5? What can we multiply by to equal 1? 5/3. Right, so cross cancel if you want to prove it, right? Yeah, it equals 1. Everything crosses out. So this is very similar. If you had 3/5 x equals 2, what would you multiply on both sides? 5/3. That's what we're doing right now by coming up with these missing numbers. That's what we'll be doing a bit later. You'll multiply both sides by 5/3, and then they cancel out. You have answer of 1x. Cancel out is a little tricky because the last problem, cancel out meant equals 0. When you're multiplying and dividing, cancel out equals 1. So when you say, oh, cross those off, they cancel out, they equal two different numbers depending on what you're doing. Now, if you're taking notes and you didn't know that, that's something I didn't write up here, but I said that's actually really important. You want to write that down. So don't just copy what you see and say that's the only stuff that's important. You know, oh, cancel out can mean two things. If you're adding, it's 0. If you're multiplying and dividing, cancel out means equals 1. All right, and just keep going. 7 over 2. What do we get here? 1 over -2, or just, you can put the negative anywhere, right? Doesn't matter. On the bottom, middle, or top, it's equivalent because the two negatives are multiplied positive. So here we'll have -5/3, and we'll have -2/7. All of these will cancel out, meaning equals 1, and the two negatives cancel out to be positive. Okay. Not too bad. And that's pretty much your homework. If you can handle that, yeah, okay. Not too big of a deal. There's a few more. Don't forget to simplify. So if you have 1/9, what's the reciprocal of 1/9? 9 over 1, but over 1 you don't need to write. So small but important detail. Another thing to write down. Another thing to write a note to yourself. Your reciprocal should never be over 1. If your reciprocal has a 1 underneath, you drop it. So that's important. Write it down so that when you get your homework, and I'm checking tomorrow, I don't give you a B on your homework because you have a bunch of answers that are 9 over 1, 4 over 1, and you'll say, well, that's the same thing. I'm like, it is. Why don't you write that down? Okay? One's more simplified than the other, though. When you drop the over 1, it's more simplified. You must do that. And because when you have fewer numbers on your paper, it's better. So mathematicians, we want to make things as simple as possible. It doesn't need to be there. It should not be there. Okay. Have a good day. Yeah, pick your homework up on the way out.